Everyone in Mill Creek knew the old broom factory was useless. Its roof had folded in during a spring storm. Its floorboards bowed under years of damp straw and rat nests. The paint had peeled off the sign so badly that only 3 letters remained, and children dared each other to throw stones through the windows after church. So when Mara Bell, a single mother with $6 to her name, raised her hand at the county auction, the room went quiet for one breath. Then the laughter started. They told her she had bought dust. They told her no decent woman would sleep in a place where even the rats had learned to leave. One man said the only thing inside that factory worth keeping was the match that would burn it down. Mara said nothing. She only held her son's hand and walked to the building before dark, because a broken roof was still better than no roof at all. But inside that place, behind the smell of mold and old broom corn, something had been preserved, not in a safe, not in a drawer, in the last bundles hanging above the workbench, and the first time one of them fell, Mara heard metal strike the floor. Rain started before Mara and Eli reached the factory. It came thin at first, turning the road into brown paste under the wheels of the little handcart. Their belongings rattled behind them: 2 quilts, 1 cracked lantern, 3 potatoes, Eli's school slate, and the blue sewing tin Mara had not opened since her mother died. "Is it ours?" he asked. Mara touched the folded deed in her coat pocket. The paper was already soft from the rain, but her name was still there. Mara Bell. $6 paid. Property transferred. For now, she said. She hated the answer the moment it left her mouth. Behind them, Mill Creek's auction hall still glowed with lamplight. She could almost hear the laughter again, the scrape of chairs, the man in the back calling out that she had bought herself straw with walls around it. What she heard more clearly was the landlord's voice from that morning, saying county people asked questions when a boy slept in rooms his mother could not pay for. A broken factory was not a home, but it was an address. And for the next inspection, that might be the difference between keeping Eli beside her and watching some clerk lead him away. The factory appeared at the end of the road like something the town had tried to forget. One wall leaned outward. The sign swung from one chain. The door had swollen in its frame, and weeds grew so high around the steps that Mara had to kick a path through them. Eli stared at the dark windows. "It smells old from outside," he whispered. "That means it's been waiting," Mara said, because she could not bear to say what it really meant. The door resisted twice before it gave. Damp air rolled out, thick with mold, dust, and the dry, sweet rot of old broom corn. Mara lifted the lantern. Rows of workbenches stood in the gloom. Broken handles lay scattered across the floor. In the rafters, unfinished brooms hung upside down, their straw heads gathered tight, their shadows moving in the draft. Eli stepped closer to her coat. Mara's hand went to the blue sewing tin. Inside, beneath needles, buttons, and faded ribbon, lay her mother's broom needle. It was a flat strip of steel with a hooked eye, made for pulling twine through packed broom corn. Lydia Bell had carried it in her apron pocket for years. When Mara was 9, her mother had placed that tool in her palm and said, "A poor woman can be lied about in a ledger, Mara, but honest work leaves marks in the hands." Mara had not understood then. She understood the hands. She still knew how to test broom corn by bending the stalk close to her ear. She knew a sail broom should balance just below the binding. She knew the twine should bite deep enough to hold, not so deep it split the straw. Small lessons. People laughed at them until they needed a clean floor or a steady wage. She set the tin on the driest bench and checked the corner under the west wall. The roof there still held. The floor looked stained but solid. If she moved the cart inside, hung the quilts across 2 posts, and kept Eli away from the broken glass, they might sleep dry. A carriage rolled up outside before she could unload the first quilt. The lantern flame trembled. A man's voice came through the doorway. "Mrs. Bell?" Mara knew that voice from the auction hall. Gideon Voss, county commissioner, church benefactor, the kind of man who never raised his tone because other people did it for him. He stood on the threshold in a dark coat, rain shining on his hat. He did not step inside. His eyes moved past Mara, past Eli, past the cracked benches, and lifted toward the back rafters. "I was hoping to catch you before you settled in," he said. "This place is not fit for a child." "No place I could afford was," Mara answered. His smile thinned. "That is exactly why I came. The county can correct a mistake. I can have the deed reversed quietly. Give you $10 tonight. Perhaps help you find a room somewhere respectable." Eli's fingers caught Mara's sleeve. $10 would buy food, maybe 2 weeks in a boarding room. It would also put her back on a street by the end of the month, with no deed, no shelter, and Gideon praised for charity. "No," Mara said. Gideon sighed. "Pride is expensive, Mrs. Bell. So is rent." For the first time, his eyes settled on her face. Then, softly, he asked, "Have you cleared out those old broom bundles in the rear yet?" The question landed too neatly. Not the roof, not the broken stove, not the deed. The broom bundles. Mara kept her voice flat. "I only just opened the door." "Good." He caught himself a breath too late. "I mean, good that you have not disturbed anything unsafe." After he left, the rain thickened. Mara stood still until the sound of his carriage faded. The auctioneer, Mr. Pruitt, had not laughed that afternoon. When he pressed the deed into her hand, he had murmured, "Some things should not be burned just because men call them rubbish." She had thought he meant the building. Now, she was not sure. Eli tugged her sleeve. "Mama." He was staring toward the rear door, where a narrow line of rain showed through a crack in the boards. A shadow moved across it. Mara snatched up the lantern. "Who's there?" Only Rain answered. But when the light reached the back wall, one broom high above the workbench was still swaying, though no wind touched it. Then something inside it gave a small, hard tap. Metal against wood. Mara did not move until Eli whispered her name. The broom above the workbench had stopped swaying, but the sound it had made stayed in the room like a held breath. Metal did not belong inside a broom. Not unless someone had put it there. "Stay by the wall," Mara said. Eli obeyed. Though his eyes followed her every step, the workbench groaned when Mara climbed onto it. Dust slid from the rafters. She reached for the hanging bundle, expecting the straw to crumble in her hand, but the binding held firm. Too firm. Whoever tied it had wrapped the twine twice around the neck, then pulled it so deep the broomcorn pinched inward. Her mother would have called it wasteful. Mara cut the twine with her pocket knife. The bundle loosened. Dry broomcorn spilled across the bench, and something thin dropped between the stalks with a dull tick. Mara lifted the lantern closer. It was a strip of metal no longer than her thumb, dark with age, with 2 small holes punched near one end. She rubbed it against her skirt until a few marks came clear. A woman's name, Agate, and a number. Eli leaned in. "Is it money?" "No." Mara turned it over. "I don't know what it is," but she knew it was not trash. The name had been cut too carefully. The number had not been scratched by accident, and the 2 holes looked as if the metal had once been tied to something, or someone had wanted it tied where paper could not last. Mara tucked the strip into her sewing tin beside Lydia's broom needle. By morning, survival pushed mystery aside. Rain had found 3 new leaks. A puddle crept toward their quilts. Eli's socks were wet, and the last potato had gone soft in the middle. Mara tore loose a warped board from a broken crate, wedged it beneath the worst drip, and climbed onto a chair to patch the roof from inside with oilcloth and bent nails. She could not fix the factory. She only had to make it look enough like shelter before the county came. She swept glass away from the west corner with a broken handle and spread their quilts on 2 dry planks. Then she sorted the old broomcorn, testing each stalk the way Lydia had taught her. Bend, listen, feel for the snap. Most of it was dead. A few bundles still had strength. Enough, perhaps. For one broom, enough to prove her hands had not forgotten. At the public pump, women stepped aside when she approached, not out of kindness, but the way people moved from smoke. One whispered that no child should be raised in a factory. Another said Gideon Voss had a generous heart, and Mara ought not test it. Mara filled 2 buckets and said nothing. When she returned, a man stood inside the open door. He wore a canvas coat and carried a leather folder, though his boots were too clean for any honest inspection. His gaze did not go to the puddles. It did not go to the cracked stove or the glass near the east wall. It went straight to the rear rafters. "County Safety Office," he said, as if the words alone gave him ownership of the air. "Commissioner Voss asked that I make certain the boy is not in immediate danger." Mara set the buckets down. "The boy has a name." The man glanced at Eli. "I am sure he does." He opened the folder, but there was no paper inside worth reading. Mara watched his eyes lift again to the old bundles hanging above the workbench. "You plan to clear those out?" he asked. "When I have time. Old straw catches fire. So do empty threats." His mouth tightened. He walked the room slowly, touching nothing until he reached the back bench. There his fingers brushed the broomcorn scattered from the bundle Mara had cut open. He paused just long enough for her to see that he recognized the loosened binding. Then he smiled. "Be careful what you disturb, Mrs. Bell. Some old materials belong to the county even after a sale. I bought the building and everything inside it. That depends on what everything means." After he left, Mara counted the hanging bundles. There were 23. By noon, there were 22. One from the far corner had vanished. No straw on the floor. No broken twine. No sign of anyone carrying it out except a faint trail of damp mud leading from the rear door to the alley grass. Eli stood very still beside her. Was it the man from the county? Mara looked toward the road. He wanted us to think it was. That frightened her more. She barred the rear door with a broken broom handle and opened the sewing tin again. The metal strip lay beside Lydia's needle, both of them dull gray in the lamplight. This time, Mara scrubbed the strip with ash and a corner of her sleeve until more of the date showed. The year made her breath catch. It was the year her mother had worked at this factory. At the bottom of the strip, beneath the number, was a tiny stamped mark she had missed before. Not a letter, not a county seal. A hammer, crooked at the handle. Mara picked up Lydia's broom needle. Near the hooked eye, almost worn smooth by years of use, the same crooked hammer had been stamped into the steel. The hammer mark made the factory feel smaller. Mara held her mother's broom needle in one hand and the metal strip in the other, turning both toward the lantern until the crooked stamp caught the light. The same maker. The same tool. Maybe the same year. Her first thought was to run to the blacksmith at once. Her second was Eli, asleep under 2 quilts beside a bucket catching rain. Morning would have to come first. At dawn, Mara did what fear had always forced her to do. She worked. She barred the front door with a plank, tucked the metal strip deep inside the sewing tin, and began to map the factory the way her mother had once mapped a work table. Useful things first, dangerous things second, strange things last, because strange things had a way of pulling a woman away from the roof over her child. The front room held 3 long benches, each scarred by years of clamps. Beneath one bench, she found twine so brittle it broke between her fingers. Beneath another, a rusted knife with its handle wrapped in faded red cloth. The old foot-powered trimmer stood near the east wall, its blade dull but not broken. In the corner, a stack of broom handles leaned under a tarp. Most were warped. 12 were straight enough to sand. 12 handles meant 12 chances. Eli woke while she was testing one against the floor. "Are we making them?" he asked, his hair standing up on one side. "We are seeing what the place remembers how to do," Mara said. That made him smile. Behind the benches, the factory narrowed into the old drying room. There the air changed. It smelled less of rot and more of dust that had not been disturbed in years. Bundles of broomcorn hung in rows from ceiling hooks, their heads wrapped in twine, their handles unfinished. Mara noticed the pattern only after the 3rd row. They were not hung by size. They were hung by binding. Some had plain twine. Some had twine rubbed pale with a chalky wash. Some were tied once at the neck. Others were tied twice, then looped beneath the shoulder in a way no maker would use, unless the broom was not meant to be sold. She counted the double-bound bundles. 7. Then she looked at the empty hook where the missing bundle had been. 8. Eli, meanwhile, had crawled beneath a low sorting table and pulled out a cloth sack so dry it made a whispering sound when he dragged it across the floor. "Mama, this one has grain." Mara knelt. Not grain. Seeds. Broomcorn seeds, small and hard, sealed in a folded sack and hidden where damp had not reached. Most would be dead after so many seasons. But when she pressed a few against her thumb, several held firm. A foolish hope rose in her chest before she could stop it. Not money, not safety, not yet, but something that could grow. Before she could speak, hoofbeats struck the road outside. Eli slid the sack behind him. A man filled the doorway without knocking. Sheriff Calder was broad, gray-mustached, and dry under his oilskin coat, as if rain knew better than to touch him. Mara had seen him at evictions, at auctions, at church suppers, always standing close enough to power to look like part of it. "Mrs. Bell," he said, "I hear you've been moving things. I've been cleaning the property I bought. Cleaning can become tampering." With dirt? His eyes went past her to the drying room, not to the broken stairs. not to the cracked window where any child might cut a hand. To the rows of hanging brooms. With county materials, he said. Mara wiped her palms on her skirt. The deed says contents included. The deed says abandoned fixtures and ordinary goods. It does not give you the right to carry off records. She had not said records. The word struck the room harder than thunder. Eli looked at her. Mara kept her face still. What records would those be, Sheriff? Calder's jaw shifted. For a moment, annoyance showed through the official calm. Then he gave a small laugh. Old rubbish, most likely. Tags, scraps. Things women make important when they have no better work. Mara felt the sewing tin like heat beneath the bench, though it was nowhere near her hand. If they are rubbish, she said, why did a county man come before breakfast to protect them? The sheriff stepped inside then, slow and heavy. Because a child sleeps here. Because fires start in straw. Because unstable women sometimes decide junk is evidence of wrongs that never happened. The insult was meant to make her flinch. She did not give it to him. He walked past her toward the drying room. Eli moved, just a little, blocking the sack of seeds with his knees. Calder did not notice the sack. His gaze had lifted to the highest beam, where one bundle hung alone above the rear workbench. It was darker than the rest, its broomcorn wrapped in 2 bands of twine, its handle unfinished, its straw head tight as a fist. Calder stopped beneath it. The room went quiet enough for Mara to hear water drip into the bucket behind her. You'll keep your boy out of this back room, he said. I'll decide where my son stands. No. His voice lowered. You'll decide whether you want the county deciding for you. Then he turned, but not before his eyes touched the broom once more. At the door, he paused. Some advice, Mrs. Bell. A poor woman keeps her child by proving she is sensible. I'll remember that. You do that. He looked back toward the high beam. And you don't want to touch the one on top. When he was gone, Mara did not move for a long time. Then Eli whispered, Mama, how did he know there was one on top? Mara looked up. The highest broom hung still in the gray morning light, but now it no longer looked forgotten. It looked guarded. By noon, Mara had stopped looking at the factory as a ruin. That did not mean it had become kind. The west wall still groaned when the wind pressed against it. Rain still found its way through nail holes and split shingles. The floor had soft places that Eli marked with pieces of chalk, so neither of them would step wrong in the dark. But after Sheriff Calder left, Mara saw what fear had nearly hidden. A corner under the west wall was dry. The long bench nearest the window, though scarred and warped, still stood level if she wedged a brick beneath one leg. The foot trimmer could be cleaned. 12 handles were straight enough. The seed sack under the table held a small future if she could find soil. And hanging from the lower rafters were at least 5 bundles of broomcorn not yet lost to damp. Mara took down one ordinary bundle first, not one of the double-bound ones. She would not touch the guarded broom yet, not while she had a hungry child and men watching the doors. She laid the broomcorn across the bench and let her fingers remember. Sort the stalks by length. Turn the rough side inward. Keep the shoulder full. Pull the twine until it sings, not until it screams. Lydia's voice came back in pieces, never as memory alone, always as instruction. Her mother had not taught sadness. She had taught pressure, balance, repair. Mara threaded the old broom needle, set her boot against the handle, and began to bind. Eli sat on an overturned crate, watching as if she were performing a magic trick. It looks like a real one, he said. It had better, Mara answered. A real one might buy supper. Her palms burned before the binding was finished. Twice the twine snapped. Once the broomcorn shifted, and she had to loosen the whole head and start again. When the broom finally held, crooked but sturdy, Mara trimmed the ends with the dull cutter until the straw fell in a clean skirt around the handle. It was not beautiful. It would sweep. She wrapped it in flour sackcloth and walked with Eli to the back lane behind Mrs. Della Price's laundry, where steam pressed against the windows and white sheets hung like tired flags. Della was a narrow woman with red hands and eyes that missed very little. I don't buy charity, Della said before Mara could speak. I'm not selling it. Mara unwrapped the broom. Della took it, turned it once, then tested the binding with her thumb. Something changed in her face at the feel of the twine. Not softness. Recognition. Who taught you that shoulder knot? My mother. Della's hand stilled. What was her name? Mara hesitated. Names had weight in Mill Creek, and poor women learned not to set weight where men could kick it. Lydia Bell. The laundrywoman looked toward the street, then back at the Broom. How much? Bread. Soap if you have some broken pieces. And maybe a little lard. Della went inside and returned with more than that. Half a loaf, a paper twist of salt, 2 heel ends of soap, and a jar with bacon grease scraped from somebody else's breakfast. She would not meet Mara's eyes when she handed them over. Mara should have left then. Instead, because the name on the first metal strip had been pressing against her thoughts all morning, she took it from her pocket and held it low, hidden between them. Have you ever seen anything like this? Della's face drained so quickly, Mara thought she might drop the broom. Put that away. You know the name? I know enough not to say names in daylight. Mrs. Price, take the food and go. Della shoved the broom back into Mara's hands, then seemed to remember she had bought it and let go as if it burned. Do not bring those things here again. Those things, not that thing. Mara walked back to the factory with food in her basket and cold in her stomach. By late afternoon, she had fed Eli bread fried in bacon grease and set him to sorting the firm seeds from the dead ones. The factory felt different with one broom sold. Not safe, but awake. Mara used a broken ladder to brace the sagging roof beam above their sleeping corner, wedged 2 planks beneath it, and tied the support with rope she found near the old loading door. For the first time since the landlord threw their things into the street, Eli laughed. A small laugh, but real, when a broomcorn seed jumped from his fingers and disappeared into a crack. Mara almost let herself smile. That night, the beam fell. It did not collapse all at once. First came the snap of rope, then the scrape of wood sliding against wood. Mara woke to the groan and threw herself across Eli just as the ladder support kicked loose, and one end of the beam crashed onto the crate where his feet had been. Dust swallowed the lantern light. Eli screamed once, then clung to her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering through both their coats. Mara coughed, reached for the rope, and saw the cut. Not broken, cut clean through. She did not sleep again. At dawn, a bundle lay outside the front door. For one wild second, she thought another broom had been stolen and returned. Then she saw the flour sackcloth around the handle. Her broom, the one Della had bought. Mara unwrapped it with stiff fingers. The binding was still tight. The straw was clean. The handle had not split. There was nothing wrong with it. Then Eli pointed. A narrow slit had been carved into the end of the handle. Something white was tucked inside. Mara pulled it free. A scrap of paper, folded twice. 4 words written in a hurried hand. Don't ask about payroll. Mara looked past the road, past the laundry smoke rising over town, and toward the highest broom still hanging in the rear of the factory. The warning had not come from someone who hated her. It had come from someone afraid enough to hide inside the only thing Mara knew how to make. Mara did not go to Silas Reed until she had hidden the metal strip twice. First, she wrapped it in cloth and tucked it beneath the false bottom of the sewing tin. Then, because the returned broom had taught her that even familiar things could carry messages, she slid the tin under a floorboard beneath Eli's quilt. Eli watched her do it. Are we in trouble because of that little piece? Mara pressed the board flat. We are in trouble because somebody thinks poor women don't know what they are holding. The blacksmith shop stood behind the feed store, where the road turned red from iron filings. Silas Reed had not shot a horse in years, but smoke still rose from his chimney. He mended hinges, sharpened plows, and refused conversation unless paid extra. When Mara entered, he was filing a stove latch. He did not look up until she set Lydia's broom needle on the work table. The file stopped, only for a heartbeat. Then he kept working. I don't mend sewing notions. It isn't for sewing. I know what it is. Mara placed the metal strip beside it, the crooked hammer mark facing up. This time, Silas did not pretend. His face tightened, and the hand holding the file went still in the air. For an old man, he moved quickly. He snatched the strip, turned it once, and shoved it back toward her as if it were hot enough to burn. Take that out of here. You made the mark. I made many marks. This one is on my mother's needle. His eyes flicked to the door. Then your mother should have taught you when to stop asking. She taught me work leaves marks in the hands. She should have taught you men erase more than paper. The words chilled her more than denial would have. Mara stepped closer. What is it? Silas lowered his voice. A warning, if you're wise. A record, if you're honest. The file clattered onto the table. Honest women die tired in this town, Mrs. Bell. Wise ones stay alive long enough to feed their children. Burn it. Burn every last piece you find. Then sell that factory before Voss remembers he can take more than a roof. So he knew Gideon's name belonged in the room. That should have made Silas an ally. Instead, it made him look like a man who had survived by letting other people disappear first. Mara left with more questions than answers. But Silas's fear had told her one thing. The strip was not meaningless. The name on it was Clara Mays. That afternoon, Mara took Eli to St. Agnes Church, where old relief ledgers were kept in a cabinet behind the vestry. She told the secretary she was looking for baptism dates for a neighbor's child. It was not a clean lie, but truth rarely opened locked cabinets for poor women. The secretary left her alone for 10 minutes. Mara used 9. She found Clara Mays in a ledger from 12 years before. Widow. 2 children. Applied for county relief after factory closure. Payment marked received in full. A thumbprint sat beside the entry. But in the marriage register, Clara Mays had signed her own name in a neat, slanted hand. A woman who could sign did not need a thumbprint unless someone else wanted the record to look simple. "Mama," Eli whispered. An old woman stood at the end of the pews, staring at the open ledger. Her hair was white beneath a brown hat. One hand clutched the back of a bench. Her eyes were not on Mara. They were on the name. "Mrs. Mays?" Mara asked. The woman flinched as if struck. "Don't read that here. I found something at the Broom factory." The old woman backed away. "No, you didn't. Please, I only need to know. You need to stop needing." Then she turned and hurried through the side door, so fast her cane nearly slipped on the stone step. Mara followed, but by the time she reached the churchyard, the woman was gone between the hedges. That was when Gideon Voss appeared beside the iron gate. He held his hat in one hand and a folded envelope in the other, as if he had arrived for a condolence visit. "Church records are delicate things," he said. "People misread them when they are under strain." Mara stood between him and Eli. "Do you follow every woman who buys property from the county?" "Only the ones putting children in unsafe buildings." He extended the envelope. $25. The number stunned her despite herself. "For a $6 factory?" "For peace," Gideon said. "A room at Mrs. Haskell's boarding house. Food. A proper bed for the boy. I can also speak to the welfare clerk and assure him you are attempting to be sensible." The envelope was thick enough to change a month. Mara thought of the cut rope above Eli's sleeping place, the leaking roof, the soft potatoes, her son's thin wrists inside his sleeves. Then she thought of Clara Mays staring at her own name as if it had climbed out of a grave. "No." Gideon's smile remained, but the man beneath it stepped forward. "You are confusing stubbornness with motherhood, and you are confusing charity with a purchase." His eyes hardened. "If the county finds that boy sleeping under a collapsing roof while his mother chases old scraps through church books, the county will act." Eli's hand found Mara's. Gideon tucked the envelope back into his coat. "Think carefully, Mrs. Bell. Some women lose wages. Some lose reputations. A mother can lose more." He walked away before she could answer. Mara stood in the churchyard until the bell struck 4. Then she looked down at Eli and knew the offer had not been generous. It had been fear with money wrapped around it. Mara waited until Eli was asleep before she touched the broom on the highest beam. All evening, it had seemed to watch her. She had tried to mend the roof brace again, tried to count the handles, tried to sort the living seeds from the dead ones under the lantern, but every small task ended with her eyes lifting to that dark bundle hanging alone above the rear workbench. Sheriff Calder had warned her not to touch it. Gideon had offered money before she knew what it held. Silas Reed had told her to burn everything, and Clara Mays had looked at her own name, as though a locked door had opened inside a grave. Mara could no longer pretend the broom was only straw. She set Eli's boots beside him in case they had to run, tucked the deed inside her coat, and moved the long bench under the beam. The factory groaned around her in the wind. Rain slid through the roof in thin silver lines. The lantern flame leaned and straightened, as if it too were afraid to look up. The bundle was higher than she had thought. She climbed onto the bench, then onto a crate, one hand gripping a ceiling joist. Dust fell into her hair. The broom's straw head brushed her cheek, dry and stiff. Its binding was not just double-wrapped. It had been stitched through with wire so fine she had mistaken it for dark twine. No broom maker did that. Wire was not for selling. Wire was for keeping something shut. Mara worked the tip of her knife beneath the first strand. It snapped with a sound too sharp for the room. She froze, listening. Eli turned in his sleep, but did not wake. She cut the second wire, then the twine. The broom corn loosened in layers. Not loose straw like the first bundle. This one had been packed around a hollow center, tied so carefully that a person could have hung it for 50 years and never known. Something slid against her palm. Not one strip of metal. Many. They were bound together on a length of blackened cord, thin tags stacked like leaves, each one dark with age, each one punched with 2 holes, each one stamped at the bottom with Silas Reed's crooked hammer. Mara nearly dropped them. She climbed down slowly and set the bundle on the bench. The cord held more than 20 tags. Some were bent, some were stained, some still carried bits of old straw in the holes where they had been hidden. She took the first one to the lantern. Anne Nicole, June Harrell, Clara Mays, Ruth Danner, Evelyn Pike. Names she had heard in church whispers. Names attached to women who had scrubbed floors, buried husbands, raised children alone, or vanished into back rooms when men began talking about money. Beside each name was a date. Beside each date, a number. Hours. Mara knew it before she allowed herself to know it. The numbers were not prices. They were not shelf marks. They were not warehouse counts. A broom factory did not need a woman's name, a date, and a number, unless someone had wanted to remember what she had worked, or what she had been owed. Her breath began to tremble. She turned the next tag. Lydia Bell. The room changed. For a moment, Mara was not 31, standing in a ruined factory with rain in her boots. She was 9 again, sitting on a kitchen step, watching her mother wrap cloth around swollen fingers before dawn. Lydia had come home from the broomworks with straw dust in her hair and silence in her mouth. When Mara asked why she kept going if the factory made her hands bleed, her mother had answered, because a woman with a child cannot afford the kind of pride men admire. After Lydia died, people said she had been unreliable near the end. They said she had stopped showing up. They said relief money had been offered, but Lydia Bell had not known how to hold on to help when decent people gave it. Mara had hated those stories. She had also feared them, because poverty made every insult sound possible. Now the tag lay in her hand. Lydia Bell, April 17. 11 hours. 11 hours in one day. No woman abandoned work after 11 hours unless something had been taken from her first. Mara went to the sewing tin and pulled out the church notes she had stolen in memory. Clara Mays, payment received in full. Thumbprint, county relief closed. She set the Lydia tag beside them and saw the shape of it. Not the whole truth yet, but enough. The tags were harder than paper. Harder to burn, harder to change. Maybe that was why they had been hidden in brooms instead of ledgers. Eli woke when she laughed once, a broken sound with no joy in it. Mama? She wiped her face before turning. I found your grandmother's name. He sat up, eyes wide and sleepy. In the broom? Yes. Is that good? Mara looked at the tag in her palm. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell him his grandmother had reached across years and left them something bright. But this was not bright. This was proof of a wound. It means people lied about her, Mara said. And maybe about a lot of women. Eli stood and came to the bench. He did not touch the tags. Somehow, even half asleep, he knew not to. What will you do? Before Mara could answer, a carriage stopped outside. No wheels on mud by accident. No traveler passing in that weather. Someone had come straight to the factory after dark. Mara swept the tags into her apron, but not fast enough to hide the cord, the opened broom, the stripped wire on the bench. A knock came, not hard. Polite. That made it worse. Gideon Voss stood beneath the sagging porch roof, holding a lantern of his own. Rain shone on his shoulders, but his face was calm, almost sorrowful, as if she had disappointed him in some private way. I saw your light, he said. No, you didn't. His eyes moved past her. To the bench, to the cut broom, to the loose broomcorn. Then, very softly, he said, Mrs. Bell, whatever you think you found tonight, Lydia's tag will not help you. Mara's fingers closed around the apronful of metal. Eli made a small sound behind her. Gideon heard it and lowered his voice further. For your son's sake, let the dead keep their peace. Mara stared at him through the rain and understood the shape of the enemy for the first time. He had not come to buy the factory. He had come to make sure Lydia Bell's name was never read aloud again. The next morning, the county notice was nailed to the factory door. Mara found it before Eli woke, a square of paper pinned so straight it looked more like a verdict than a warning. The nail had gone through the center of the county seal. Inspection for child welfare and structural safety. 48 hours. Failure to provide adequate shelter may result in temporary removal of minor. Temporary. The word made her knees weaken more than any threat Gideon had spoken. Men loved gentle words for cruel things. Temporary removal. Protective custody. Sensible action. They could take a child from his mother and make it sound like a blanket being folded. Mara pulled the notice down before Eli could see it. Too late. He was standing behind her in his stocking feet, hair rumpled, eyes fixed on the paper in her hand. Are they taking me? No. The answer came too fast. She steadied it. Not while I am breathing. He nodded, but children knew when adults used courage to cover fear. By noon, the town had heard. At the public pump, 2 women stopped talking when Mara approached. At the grocer's, Mr. Bellamy said he could not extend flour on credit to a woman under county review. Even Della Price's laundry door stayed shut, though Mara saw movement behind the curtain. Gideon did not need to touch her. He had taught the town which way to lean. Mara returned to the factory, with only a small sack of beans and a coil of cheap rope bought with the last of Della's bacon grease money. She spent the afternoon making the west corner look less like ruin and more like a room. Quilts hung for walls, broken glass swept into a crate. The beam tied again with 3 lines instead of 1. Eli chalked unsafe boards with X marks, his mouth set in a serious line. They were working like people preparing for guests, but it felt like preparing for a raid. Just before dusk, Mara carried the metal tags to the old sorting table. She had wrapped Lydia's tag separately in cloth and hidden it inside her boot. The rest she divided into 2 piles, women she had heard of, women she had not. Then, she noticed something. The stolen bundle from the corner had not been random. The names missing from the cord were not the oldest ones, not the dead ones. They were the living. Clara Mays, June Harrell. Della Price's older sister, if Mara remembered the church register right. Women who could still speak if anyone gave them room. The thief had not been cleaning evidence. He had been cutting away witnesses. That understanding had barely settled when the rear door shuddered. Mara snatched the lantern off the table. Eli, behind me. The door did not open. Whoever stood outside tested the bar once, twice, then stopped. A board creaked near the loading window. Mara blew out the lantern. The factory vanished into black shapes and rain breath. Through the window crack, she saw a shoulder, then a sleeve, then a hand reaching inside with a hooked wire. Not Calder's broad hand, not Gideon's gloved one, someone smaller, faster. Mara grabbed a broom handle and struck the wire. The man cursed. The hook fell. Eli gasped as the shadow dropped from the window and ran. Mara reached the rear door in time to see a figure cross the alley and disappear beyond the feed shed. In the mud beneath the window lay 3 tags, dropped or lost in panic. She picked them up with shaking fingers. All 3 names belonged to women still alive. By morning, every loose tag had been hidden in different places. Some under the floor, some inside a cracked stove brick. Lydia's stayed in Mara's boot. The open broom was retied and hung low enough that she could grab it if they had to flee. At mid-morning, June Harrell came through the front door without knocking. She looked smaller than she had at the church, but not weaker. Her brown hat was pulled low, and both hands gripped a black cane polished by years of fear. Rain spotted her shoulders. She looked at Eli first, then at Mara, then at the high beam. "You found more than Clara's," she said. Mara did not answer. June gave a bitter nod. "Good. You're learning." "Learning what?" "That silence is the first tax they make poor women pay." She lowered herself onto the bench, as if every joint objected. Mara offered water. June ignored it. "When the factory was running, they paid us in pieces. A little cash, a little store credit, a promise that relief would cover what wages did not. We signed hours on slips. Then the slips vanished. Later, county books said we had been paid twice what we ever saw." "Why the tags?" June's mouth trembled. "Because Lydia said paper was too obedient." Mara felt the room tilt. "My mother?" June looked at her then. Really looked. "Your mother was the one who told Silas to make them. Small enough to hide. Hard enough not to burn. We tied them in bundles when the manager changed the books." Mara sat slowly. All these years, she had carried Lydia as a woman who endured. Now another shape was forming. Lydia as a woman who planned. Why didn't anyone speak? Mara asked. June's eyes sharpened. To whom? Gideon's committee? Calder's jail? The church ladies who ate from the relief pantry and thanked the men who stole from it first? Eli stood very still near the quilts. June noticed him and softened only a little. I had a boy too. That is why I signed what they put in front of me. That is why I kept breathing after I wanted to stop. Do not mistake fear for agreement, Mara Bell. Her hand tightened on the cane. Then, she twisted the silver cap. It came loose. From inside the hollow shaft, she slid a roll of cloth no wider than 2 fingers. She unwrapped it on the table. Names. So many names Mara's throat closed. Not metal tags. A list. Cramped and faded, with marks beside each woman. Widow. 2 children. Husband injured. Rent due. Signed under protest. Could write name. Force thumbprint. Mara counted quickly, then again. The list held more names than the tags she had found. Where are the rest? She whispered. June looked toward the back of the factory, past the workbenches, past the drying room, toward the wall where old broom handles leaned beneath the torn tarp. Lydia said if the brooms failed, the handles would remember. Before Mara could ask what that meant, hooves sounded on the road. June snatched up her cane cap, but her hands shook so badly it would not screw back on. Through the broken front window, Mara saw Sheriff Calder riding beside a county wagon, and on the seat next to him sat Gideon Voss. June looked at Mara, all the old fear rising in her face. They've come for the boy, she said. The wagon stopped with its wheels in the mud. Mara pushed Eli behind her before the front door opened. June stood too quickly, the list still half unrolled on the table, and Mara saw the old woman's courage crack at the sight of Gideon stepping down behind Sheriff Calder. Mrs. Bell, Gideon called, his voice carrying the false warmth of a man speaking for witnesses. We are here for the inspection notice. In a storm? Mara asked. Neglect does not wait for clear weather. Calder entered first. His eyes moved over the quilts, the chalk marks on the floor, the repaired beam, the bucket under the leak. Then they landed on June. Mrs. Harrell, he said, didn't expect to find you here. June's fingers closed around the cane. Gideon smiled, as if pleased by an accident he had arranged. Mara has been troubling old women with confused memories. We thought it best to see what sort of influence surrounds the boy. Eli stepped out from behind Mara before she could stop him. My mama fixed the roof. Calder looked at the cut rope still lying near the beam. Looks like the roof keeps needing fixing. Mara met his eyes. Because someone keeps helping it fail. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a voice came from the doorway. That beam was cut. Silas Reed stood in the rain with no hat, his coat dark at the shoulders. In one hand he carried a wrapped bundle of oilcloth. In the other, a blacksmith's hammer. Gideon's face did not change, but Mara saw his jaw lock. Silas, he said, this does not concern you. That's what I told myself for 20 years. Silas stepped inside and went straight to the cut rope. He lifted it, rubbed the clean edge between his fingers, and held it toward Calder. Knife. Fresh. No fray. No weathering. Calder did not take it. June let out a breath so small it was almost a sob. Gideon turned to Mara. You see, men wander into your factory at all hours. That hardly supports your fitness as a mother. Silas set the rope down. Then I'll wander out with the boy and his mother while you inspect. Publicly. In front of Mr. Pruitt and the pastor. No need, Gideon said sharply. There it was, the first honest sound in his voice. Mara noticed. So did June. Gideon recovered. We will return with proper papers. Bring them, Mara said. And bring the welfare clerk who signed the notice. I'd like to ask him why the county inspected my roof before it inspected its own books. Calder stepped toward her. Careful. Silas lifted his hammer just enough for the iron head to catch the lantern light. She is. The 2 men left without finishing the inspection. Only when the wagon rolled away did June sit down hard on the bench. Eli ran to the window and watched until the road was empty. Silas unwrapped the oilcloth bundle. Inside lay a set of metal tags blackened with age, a narrow punch, and a small iron die marked with the crooked hammer. Mara stared. You kept it. I buried the first one, Silas said. Made Gideon a new die when he asked. Slightly wrong. Enough that I would know if they tried to copy the tags later. June looked at him with something like anger and relief mixed together. "You could have told us. I had a daughter then," Silas said. "A sick one. Voss knew the doctor who held my debt. No one forgave him aloud. No one needed to." Silas picked up one of Mara's tags and set it beside his die. Real tags have the hammer leaning left. The false die leans right. The strike on the bottom edge is always shallow because my wrist was bad that winter. He looked at Mara. "If Voss tries to say you forged them, this proves he's lying." "It proves you made them," Mara said. "It does not prove what they meant." June tapped the list with her cane. "This does." "Not enough," Silas said. He turned toward the old work table where Mara had tied her first broom. Lydia knew that too. Mara followed his gaze. "My mother?" Silas nodded. "She said if the tags were found without the paysheet, men would call them trinkets. If the paysheet was found without the tags, they would call it a damaged ledger. So she split the truth." He knelt, ran his hand along one table leg, and pressed his thumb into a knot Mara had thought was solid wood. It shifted inward with a dry click. A hidden panel slid loose. From inside the leg, Silas drew a roll of paper wrapped in oiled cloth and brittle at the edges. Parts of it were burned away. Parts were brown with smoke, but names remained, dates remained, columns remained. And beside several names, Mara saw numbers that matched the tags. Lydia Bell was one of them. Eli whispered, "Grandma hid that?" Mara could not answer. Silas laid the burned payroll sheet on the table between the tags and June's list. The three pieces did not complete the whole truth, but they touched at enough points to make a shape no honest man could ignore. Then June looked at one blank space on the scorched sheet and frowned. "There was another page," she said. Silas closed his eyes. Mara's heart sank. "Where?" He looked toward the row of broom handles beneath the torn tarp. In the handles Lydia never finished. Mara found the second page inside the third handle. It took half the night. Silas split the unfinished handles with a chisel, while Mara held the lantern and June sat with Eli beneath the repaired beam, both of them listening for wagons on the road. Most handles held only dust and beetle husks. The first two cracked empty. But the third gave a different sound beneath Silas's tool. A muffled snap instead of a clean split. Inside the hollow handle was a roll of paper no wider than Mara's finger. The page was scorched on one side, but Lydia had folded it around a final metal tag. The name on that tag had been filed nearly smooth, as if someone had tried to erase it and failed. Silas read the faint letters and went pale. "Keep that one back," he said. "Why?" "Because if Voss sees it before the meeting, he will burn the whole town to keep it quiet." By 6 o'clock, Mill Creek's hall was full. Gideon Voss sat at the long table with Sheriff Calder to his right and the welfare clerk to his left. Behind them hung the county seal. Mara had seen that seal on eviction papers, relief forms, inspection notices, and receipts that poor people were told to sign before they were allowed to eat. Now she walked toward it carrying her mother's sewing tin. The murmurs began at once. "There she is. That poor Bell woman. Dragging the boy into it, too." Eli sat beside Della Price in the second row. Della would not meet Mara's eyes, but she had come. June sat near the aisle with her cane across her knees. Silas stood by the back wall, hat in hand, looking as if every inch of him wanted to leave. Gideon rose first. "Neighbors," he said, "we are not here to shame a struggling mother. We are here because desperation can make a person see patterns where none exist. Mrs. Bell has been living in an unsafe building with her young son, disturbing abandoned materials, frightening elderly women, and spreading accusations based on bits of metal she claims to have found in old brooms." He looked at Eli when he said unsafe. Mara felt the blow land. Then the welfare clerk cleared his throat and read from a paper. "It is the county's opinion that temporary placement may be considered if the mother persists in maintaining unsuitable shelter." The room shifted. Not against Gideon, against her. Mara opened the sewing tin and set the first tags on the table. "Ask why he wants the shelter condemned before he asks what was hidden inside it." Gideon smiled sadly. "You see? Suspicion in place of sense." He lifted a metal tag from his own folder and placed it beside hers. Fresh metal, fresh stamp, a woman's name scratched clumsily across the face. "Anyone can make a tag," he said. "A frightened woman with a grudge, a blacksmith in need of money, a child, perhaps. Are we to ruin reputations over scraps?" Calder moved as if to gather Mara's tags. "For safekeeping, No, Mara said. The sheriff's hand kept coming. Then Della Price stood. She said no. Her voice shook, but it carried. Another woman rose near the stove. Then another. June tried to stand and failed, then gripped her cane and forced herself up anyway. Gideon's expression tightened. Mrs. Harrell, think carefully. Your grandson's position at the freight warehouse is not permanent. June's face collapsed inward. For one terrible second, Mara thought she would sit. Then, Eli slipped from Della's bench and walked to June. He did not say anything. He simply held the old woman's elbow, the way Mara had taught him to help neighbors cross muddy streets. June looked down at him. Her mouth steadied. My grandson can find another warehouse, she said. I cannot find another life to tell this in. Silas came forward then. Not quickly, but with each step deliberate enough that the room made space for him. He set 2 iron dies on the table. Voss's tag is false. Gideon laughed once. And you would know because you forged the others? I would know because I made the true die 20 years ago, and I made the false one for you after you asked whether old marks could be reproduced. The room stilled. Silas pointed to Mara's tags. Hammer leans left, bottom strike shallow. My wrist was broken that winter. On his tag, the hammer leans right. New die. Wrong hand, wrong pressure. Mara picked up the false tag and held it beside Lydia's. But proof of metal was not proof of meaning. Gideon saw the weakness and struck. Even if these are old, they prove nothing. Women worked. Women were paid. County books show relief delivered. Mara unfolded the burned payroll page from the handle. Smoke marks had eaten the edges, but the columns remained. Name, date, hours, amount owed, relief offset. She read the first name, Clara Mays. 9 hours. Marked paid by thumbprint. But Clara Mays could sign her name. At the back of the hall, Clara lifted a trembling hand. Mara read another. June Harrell, 12 hours. Relief deducted. No cash issued. June struck her cane once against the floor. Then Mara read the name that had brought the factory alive. Lydia Bell, April 17th, 11 hours. Gideon said, 10. He knew it, as soon as the word left him. Mara looked up. The hall went silent in a way no gavel could command. I said 11, Mara said. Gideon's face drained of its careful pity. Silas whispered. He corrected the hidden sheet. Mara turned the payroll toward the room. The public ledger says my mother was paid and stopped coming. This sheet says she worked 11 hours that day and was still owed. The tag says the same. June's list says she signed under protest. Gideon pushed back his chair. This is disorder. No, Mara said. This is bookkeeping. Calder reached for the tin again, but Della stepped into the aisle holding the broom Mara had made. From inside its split handle, she pulled the warning note she had hidden there. I was afraid, Della said. But I knew the word payroll before Mara did. Another woman lifted a tag wrapped in cloth. Another held a torn receipt. Another gave only a name, but she said it loud enough to be counted. The hall filled with women standing, not all at once. On a B1. Like brooms taken down from rafters after years of being mistaken for dust. The welfare clerk quietly folded his inspection notice and put it away. Mara saw Eli notice it too. The boy did not smile, but his shoulders loosened as if someone had opened a hand around his throat. Gideon looked toward the side door. Silas blocked it. Then the old blacksmith reached into his coat and placed the final filed tag on the table. The nearly erased name caught the lamplight. Gideon Voss. His own family name. Silas looked at Mara, not the crowd. There was still one tag nobody had seen. Lydia kept it for the man who signed the orders. Gideon Voss did not confess. Men like him rarely gave the truth as a gift. They waited until the room had taken it from them, piece by piece, and then acted offended by the theft. He looked at the filed tag on the table, then at Silas, then at Mara. For one moment his face was empty of all the softness he had worn in public. No pity, no charity, no concern for children under broken roofs. Only calculation. That name proves nothing, he said. June Harrell laughed then, a dry sound that scraped through the hall. Funny. That is what you said about ours. The line broke something in the room. People began speaking over one another. A farmer demanded to see the county books. A widow near the stove shouted that her sister's relief had vanished the same year. Della Price held up Mara's broom, as if it were a witness with a wooden spine. Sheriff Calder reached for order and found none waiting for him. The pastor, who had sat silent until then, stood and removed the county ledger from the clerk's table. "No records leave this hall tonight, except under watch." Calder turned on him. "That is county property. So were those women's wages," the pastor said. Mara did not cheer. She kept one hand on the sewing tin and one eye on Eli. Gideon still had friends, still had keys, still had years of favors folded into pockets all over town. A room turning against him was not the same as justice. But it was the first door opening. Mr. Pruitt, the auctioneer, pushed through the crowd with his hat crushed in both hands. "I wrote the factory sale myself," he said. "Contents included. No exclusion. No county claim after transfer." The welfare clerk's face had gone gray. He took the inspection notice from his folder, looked once at Gideon, and then set it face down. "There will be no removal action tonight," he said. Mara felt Eli's fingers slip into hers. Not relief. Not yet. But breath. A messenger was sent to fetch the state marshal from the rail office 2 towns over. Until he arrived, the tags, the burned payroll pages, June's list, the false die, and the filed Voss tag were placed in a locked church collection box, with 3 keys held by 3 different people. Mara kept Lydia's tag in her hand until June touched her wrist. "She carried it long enough," June said. "Let them carry the weight now." Mara placed the tag inside. Gideon left the hall without his hat. Calder followed him, but not close enough to look loyal. By morning, Gideon Voss had been suspended from county duties pending inquiry. By afternoon, men from the state office sealed the relief ledgers, payroll books, and welfare notices. The word investigation moved through Mill Creek like weather people did not know how to dress for. Some women cried when they heard it. Some did not. Some had waited too long for tears to remain. Mara returned to the factory with Eli after sunset. The building looked no less broken than before. The roof still sagged. The west wall still needed bracing. Rainwater still sat in shallow bowls across the floor. Truth had not mended a single board. That was the part stories rarely told. Justice could open a door, but somebody still had to sweep the room. 2 days later, a man from the grain company came to the factory and offered Mara $100 for the property. He said it kindly, said she had suffered enough, said a woman with a child should take comfort when it came. Mara looked past him at the workbench where Lydia had hidden the burned page. "No," she said. He blinked. "You could start over. I am." After he left, she took the first broom she had made the crooked one. Della had returned with the warning in its handle and walked to the old wallboard, where worker names had once been painted. Most of the letters had been scraped away years ago. Only shadows remained. Mara dipped a rag in water and began to wipe the grime from the wood. Eli watched her from the doorway. "Are you cleaning it?" "No," she said. The first name appeared faintly beneath the dust. Lydia Bell. Mara pressed the rag harder. "I'm making room for the rest." By autumn, the Broom factory no longer looked dead from the road. It did not look grand. Mara had no money for grand things. The west wall still leaned a little, though Silas had braced it with iron plates he refused payment for. The roof was patched in 3 different shades of tin. One window held real glass. The others held oiled cloth until winter could be bargained with. The sign above the door had been scrubbed clean, but Mara had not repainted the old company name. She painted a new one, Bell Women's Broom Works. Della Price said it sounded too plain. June Harrell said plain things lasted longer. The first morning they opened, only 4 women came to work. Della came with sleeves rolled past her elbows, claiming laundry had taught her more about dirt than any broom maker alive. June came with her cane and a chair, saying her hands were not steady enough for binding but her memory was still sharp enough to catch a false number. Clara Mays came after standing outside for 20 minutes, one hand on the doorframe, as if the building might still ask her to be silent. Mara did not rush her. No one did. Inside, the benches had been sanded. The broken trimmer had been sharpened. The broomcorn seeds Eli had found were planted behind the factory in 3 narrow rows. Only a few had taken root, but those few stood green against the fence, stubborn as prayer. Every broom they made carried a small paper tag tied below the binding. Not hidden, not buried in straw, written plainly, made by Della Price, made by Clara Mays, made by June Harrell, modded by Mara Bell. At first, the tags slowed the work. Some women laughed at the foolishness of signing a broom. Some cried when Mara handed them the pencil. By the end of the week, no one laughed. The state investigation moved slower than hunger, but it moved. Letters came. Questions came. Men in clean coats came with satchels and copied numbers from Lydia's burned sheets. Gideon Voss's name disappeared from the county office door before the first frost. Sheriff Calder retired early, though people noticed he stopped wearing his badge before the announcement was printed. Money came later, not enough to return all that had been stolen. Not enough to buy back the years when women patched shoes with flour paste or watered soup until it could feed 5 mouths. But enough for Clara to pay off a doctor's bill she had carried for 11 years. Enough for June's grandson to leave the warehouse and apprentice with Silas. Enough for Mara to buy Eli a coat that fit his wrists. One evening, after the others had gone, Mara found Eli standing before the worker board. She had filled it slowly, Lydia Bell at the top, then Clara, June, Annie Cole, Ruth Danner, Evelyn Pike, names from tags, names from lists, names from memory when metal and paper had failed. Eli held the crooked first broom in both hands. The one Mara had made badly, the one Della had returned, the one that had carried the warning. "I swept the doorway," he said. "I saw. It still works, even though it's crooked." Mara leaned against the bench. "Most useful things are crooked somewhere." He looked at Lydia's name. "Did Grandma stand here?" Mara thought of her mother's swollen fingers, of wires stitched through broomcorn, of a burned page hidden where only work-worn hands would look. For years, she had imagined Lydia leaving the factory defeated. Now she saw something else. A woman staying late. A woman hiding proof. A woman trusting that someday another woman would know how to listen to straw, wire, wood, and silence. "Yes," Mara said. She stood here. Eli touched the first name on the board. "Did she know you'd find it?" Mara's throat tightened. "No," she said. But she knew somebody should. Outside, the town bell rang 6. Workers from the mill road passed the factory windows, and for once, they did not look at the building as if it were a warning. A few lifted their hands. One woman stopped to ask if Mara could take her niece on next month. Mara said yes, if the girl was willing to learn and willing to sign her work. When the door closed again, dust rose in the last light, gold and slow. Eli swept it toward the threshold with the crooked broom. Mara watched the dust leave the factory in a soft cloud, carrying years of rot, silence, and men's careful lies out into the evening air. The world had called her disposable. It had called the place worthless. But every morning after that, when the women opened the doors and the smell of broomcorn filled the room, Mara Bell understood something the county books had never been able to measure. Some things only look like rubbish to people who have never had to make a life with their hands.